On December 2nd, 2015, 14 people were killed and 22 others were seriously injured in a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California. 2 months later, the FBI announced that it had accessed the iPhone of the shooter, but could not unlock it, and demanded that Apple unlock the iPhone in order to find out if there was any information that was useful to understand what happened in San Bernardino. The CEO, Tim Cook, responded by saying no. He said the same engineers who built strong encryptions into the iPhone to protect our users would, ironically, be ordered to weaken those protections and make our users less safe. Unfortunately for Tim Cook, the public was relatively split. About 50% of the American public thought he should allow the FBI to unlock the iPhone, while the other 50% either wasn't sure or thought he should not. And we find that this split over our civil liberties goes for many things. We also see the public is split over whether or not the U.S. has an acceptable use of torture when trying to get information out of terrorists. And we see that overall, our support for these things, so this is a graph for support for warrantless wiretapping, seems to increase as we move further and further away from ourselves. So here we have American citizens and then citizens of other countries, the leaders of other countries, and suspected terrorists, and our support goes up to warrantless wiretap. However, more interestingly, we also see that those who seem to know more about the U.S. Wiretapping programs support wiretapping less. So here in the blue, people responded that they heard a lot about government surveillance, versus in the light blue, those people who only heard a little bit. And that's what we'll be covering today in my talk. Hello, my name is Kevin Carriere, and I'm presenting Sophisticated but Scared, the effects of political sophistication, right-wing authoritarianism, and threat on the restriction of civil liberties. This paper has been accepted pending minor revisions in SPSSI's analysis of public social issues and public policy. The second A always messes with me. I just have to figure out what I need to do in order to share my code. So once that happens, you can read it online very soon. And in this talk today, we're going to just start with a basic literature review, and we'll go over what we mean when we talk about threat, right-wing authoritarianism, political sophistication. Then we'll go over my methods and how we're going to analyze these two things in regards to support for the restriction of civil liberties. We'll look at that through support for warrantless wiretapping and the support for torture. Finally, we'll discuss the results and draw some conclusions about what we've found. So when we talk about threat, we're talking about the instability of resources. And we can kind of understand this in three main ways. We have realistic threats, so threats to our jobs and our livelihood. Here, put British workers first. There's symbolic threats to our immaterial goods, such as our cultural values, and our traditions. And then sometimes we mix them together in the literature and understand it as intergroup threat. So this is both symbolic and realistic threat. And recently, research has been exploring terroristic threat. That is the fear of terrorism, which is both a realistic threat in the fact that you feel like you're going to die, and research has actually shown that it's more correlated with symbolic threat and your fears of culture changing due to terrorism. And overall, no matter what we're feeling when we experience threat, we typically very much support the violation of human rights once we feel threatened. We'll support harsher surveillance, wiretapping, torture. We're reduced in our political tolerance and increased in our prejudice. So, overall, we have a support for this human rights and civil liberties. I think we all can say that we support human rights and civil liberties. And when you ask Americans in any population, they say yes, 99% of people support human rights. Yet, we feel a little threat, and what happens is that we stop and we actually support the restrictions of human rights and civil liberties, or SRCL, which I will be using many times, so I don't have to say that so much. And we see this throughout history in America, at least for a few examples. You can see Japanese internment camps in World War II to border camps set up on our southern border right now. When we're thinking about right-wing authoritarianism, we're thinking about those individuals who support tradition and order and subversion to authority. And when we look at right-wing authoritarianism, there's a clear effect where as you increase in your right-wing authoritarianism, you increase in the amount of threat you feel, and you increase in the amount of support for restriction of the civil liberties that you are willing to give up. So again, we have right-wing authoritarianism. If you are high in right-wing authoritarianism, we hypothesize you're also going to be willing to restrict the civil rights and human liberties of others. However, this main effect on its own is not that interesting, but what's more interesting is what the interaction between right-wing authoritarianism and threat could be. There are two basic camps. The first camp we'll call camp positive. They think that those low in right-wing authoritarianism will support restrictions less when they feel threatened. So it'll look something like this. Those who are, we have here at low threat, and those low in right-wing authoritarianism, as they get more threatened, are going to double down in their beliefs, right? Like, no, we need to protect everyone's civil liberties. We can't do that. No more torture. However, on the other hand, we have camp negative, and those people are those who believe that those low in right-wing authoritarianism will support restrictions more when they feel scared. So instead here, we can see those low in right-wing authoritarianism, as they increase in their threat, they're going to become more like their high right-wing authoritarianism peers. And this makes sense. There's much research that shows when we are faced with ambiguity and uncertainty, we're much willing to request for strong authority leaders. And so for purposes of this paper, we're going to go with camp negative and expect this kind of interaction to occur. So we have right-wing authoritarianism. We hypothesize that there will be a significant interaction on threats such that those low in right-wing authoritarianism will become like their high right-wing authoritarianism peers when high in threat. Finally, there's political sophistication, which is going to be defined as just your general political knowledge. And what we see is that overall education and your knowledge about facts seems to have really strong effects as far as supporting human rights. So those with higher levels of education are less hostile towards immigrants. Education improves the commitment to civil liberties. We increase our emotional well-being. We find meaning, and we reduce in our PTSD. And those higher in political sophistication just generally are less fearful when exposed to threatening articles. So here we're going to expect that those higher in political sophistication are actually going to support human rights and civil liberties, or not support the restriction of human rights and civil liberties. However, when we're thinking about the moderating effect on threat, we see that while higher sophisticated individuals will support spending less on military when low in threat, they do actually also increase and become more like their lower sophisticated peers when threatened. And so when we're thinking about the first moderating effect on threat, we're going to see, perhaps we're going to hypothesize that threat when high will reduce the effects of political sophistication. And there's more to be considered about political sophistication. Political sophisticates, or those high in political sophistication, are very polarized in their beliefs. They're increasingly loyal to their political party, and they show greater ideological prejudice to people who are not like them. All of these traits are very similar to what we would describe as a right-wing authoritarianism personality. So we would expect the same thing we see in right-wing authoritarianism, such that political sophistication will not be useful to those high in right-wing authoritarianism. And so that is our three main hypotheses. We're looking at two moderating effects on threat, both right-wing authoritarianism and political sophistication. To analyze this question, we looked at the American National Election Survey, both in 2008, 2012, and 2016. We had about 12,000 total participants with a mean age of about 49. And to measure our support for the restriction of in-group civil liberties, or that is warrantless wiretapping, they were asked in 2012 only, do you favor, oppose, or neither favor, oppose the government needing court permission to listen in on your phone calls. And for supporting the restriction of out-group civil liberties, we're going to ask all three, 2008, 12, and 16, do you favor, oppose, or neither favor, oppose U.S. government torturing people who are suspected of being terrorists to try to get information? As far as other measures, threat, we measured terroristic threat. So during the next 12 months, how likely is that there will be a terrorist attack in the United States? Right-wing authoritarianism, There are 4 questions in the American National Election Survey measuring child rearing, which has been shown to be very correlated with right-wing authoritarianism, so we'll use that for our measure. And finally, political sophistication. The American National Election Survey asks participants a range of questions to see how knowledgeable are they in politics. These are just listed a few of them. So who has the power in the House right now? What is Medicare? And they have multiple choice. How long is a Senate term? How many times can a president be elected? Things like that. We include a bunch of covariates in our models moving forward: education level, household income. All these covariates are either related to threat or support for the restriction of civil liberties. So we wanted to make sure that we're controlling for all of these and moving forward. Analysis, we have to use a complex survey design modeling, which allows us to take advantage of the fact that the data is nationally representative. So we use primary sampling units as provided by the American National Election Survey, and weighted all of our regressions based on ANS provided weights at a mean of 1. We'll use a logistic regression for the warrantless wiretapping, and a weighted least squares for the support for torture, and all variables were mean centered. So I hate looking at tables, but we can see them here, and instead we're going to be mostly focusing on graphics to understand what's going on. But I do want to highlight that both terroristic threat and right-wing authoritarianism, when we're thinking about support for warrantless wiretapping, were significant, such that as you increase in both, you increase your support. We also find that as you increase your political sophistication, you decrease your support for warrantless wiretapping. And as far as the interactions, the only interaction that came out in significant for warrantless wiretapping was our threat times right-wing authoritarianism, and we'll see that here. So first we're going to graph the full 3-way interactions to see what that looks like. And here at the bottom, we're looking at political sophistication as this increases. And here's the lower tercile threat. So we broke the data into 3s. So this is the 33 percentile, people who felt threat not a lot. And then here, right-wing authoritarianism, those low in right-wing authoritarianism, middle, and high. All right, so as their political sophistication increased, they supported wiretapping less. The effects kind of started to die out in the middle, and there was no significant differences in high threatened individuals. When we're looking at the interaction between right-wing authoritarianism and threat, what we see here is just so this graph shows the slope of threat based on right-wing authoritarianism. So if it's at the top half of the axis, it means it's positive, and so more threat is going to increase more support for restrictions. So here we can see the range of right-wing authoritarianism, and we can basically see that for those low in right-wing authoritarianism, threat is significant and increasing your support. For those in the middle, threat is still significant and increasing their support. For those high in right-wing authoritarianism, threat doesn't matter. Right? So that would make sense if we're thinking about the B that we talked about. Threat is only affecting those low in right-wing authoritarianism. And we can see the same thing for political sophistication, where again, now political sophistication is on the bottom, so increases are related to decreases in support. And so here, the lower tercile threat, political sophistication is this, and our right-wing authoritarian is the x-axis. And so for lower tercile, political sophistication is significant. For the middle 2 terciles, right-wing authoritarianism. For the middle tercile threat, it's the same thing. But when threat is high and right-wing authoritarianism is high, political sophistication is not doing anything. Again, now we'll look at the model for support for torture. And we'll see the same thing. So terroristic threat and right-wing authoritarianism, as we increase in that, we're increasing our support for torture. And as we increase in our political sophistication, we're decreasing our support for torture. This time, right-wing authoritarianism and threat do not interact, but political sophistication is interacting for support for torture on both threat and right-wing authoritarianism. And so we'll look at the whole visualization just for time. Here, what we can see is that again, political sophistication is working for those low in right-wing authoritarianism and low in threat. Here, the graph got switched. That was my mistake. In the middle, it doesn't seem to be doing as much. and the upper tercile is non-significant, right? So again, as you increase in your political sophistication, it's only really working when you're low in right-wing authoritarianism and low in threat. You can visualize that here and see the same thing. So the slope of political sophistication on right-wing authoritarianism is only significant in the lower tercile of right-wing authoritarianism and only significant in the lower and middle terciles of threat. In the uppers, it's not significant doing anything. Okay. So as a result, we had threat, the main effect of threat. We found that it was significant for support for warrantless wiretapping and support for torture. Right-wing authoritarianism, we found the same thing. And political sophistication, we found that it was increasing our support for human rights. As far as the moderators, right-wing authoritarianism was interacting with threat for the in-groups, but it was not for the out-groups. And political sophistication was not interacting for the in-groups, but was for both out-groups. There. So overall, what we can see is that the moderation of threat functions differently when we're considering different groups. This is really important because there's a serious gap in the literature when we're thinking about civil liberties, and we're not really considering whose civil liberties that we're thinking about. We kind of just assume it was one, and we say threat and right-wing authoritarianism always interact, and it doesn't seem to be the case. It only seems to be the case when we're thinking about our own rights. Then political sophistication is benefiting sometimes. So it's benefiting when we're low in threat and low in right-wing authoritarianism, which adds a small but growing literature suggesting that education and meaning creation can help buffer threats and support human rights. And political sophistication was independent when we were considering the rights of in-group members, which is really important. It suggests perhaps a way to protect these human rights is to continue to grow our in-group. If we can keep growing our in-group, then we don't have to worry about the moderating effects of threat and right-wing authoritarianism. We can add more people into our in-group and stop talking about things such as citizenship, but instead focusing on humanness. There's work for the identification with the global community. That may really help us here in protecting human rights and stopping these tragedies.